Hey everybody. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the access control family of NIST 800-171. So this one has a lot of controls, like you can see. Let's dive into these and see how this impacts you as a LabVIEW developer or as a just someone who's developing test and measurement systems. So our first control, limit access to systems to only authorized users, processes, or devices. So this is going to impact your IT teams a lot, but it also impacts you as well. So systems could be anything, right? So this could be your computers, different workstations throughout the facility, servers, etc. So your IT team is controlling that. Also specific processes, right? So usually that means application whitelisting. So we're blocking out, we're blocking all applications from being able to execute except for ones that are on an approved list. That, and like I said, that's usually managed by your IT team. Also devices, right? You want to make sure, I can't just go plug some device in and have it connect to my network and start, being able to, do stuff, right? So we're even going to implement whitelisting in terms of devices that are able to connect. And typically that's handled through like MAC addresses. There will be different tools. And this is usually handled by your IT team with enterprise level tools. But even on a LabVIEW system, right, we need to be able to limit access to only certain users, processes, and devices. So what that means is we need to create some sort of access control in our LabVIEW programs. Just being able to access the system. Just being able to access the system is one thing, right? So typically, running a test system, depending on what the system is and what it does, you may not want just anyone being able to run it. Maybe you want to have like a trained or certified operator list or something like that. So a great way to do that is using Active Directory. So you can create user groups in Active Directory, and you can create a group for, hey, test stand certified operator or something like that, right? And it can be as specific as you want. And you can create tiers to that. You can have like a certified operator, or you can have like a test stand administrator, or test stand manager, supervisor. You can have multiple levels there, and you can create all of these different groups. And then through LDAP, when your LabVIEW code executes, you can check if, hey, who's the person that's running this right now? Are they at least a certified user? And if they're in that list, then hey, give them access. But then you can also restrict access to different features in that software using Active Directory as well. So if I have like an admin user group, right, I can check if they want to use some admin feature of the software. I can just check if they have permission through Active Directory. If they do, then let them use that feature. If they don't, either disallow it or maybe even not show it on the software at all, right? When the software opens up, check if they're an administrator, and if they aren't, just hide the administrator options entirely. So you can do stuff like that. So you will need to implement some sort of access control in your LabVIEW systems. How you do that is a little bit up to you, right? But like I said, I think that's the most robust solution. Your IT team is already managing Active Directory and keeping it up to date. When employees leave, they're making sure that those accounts get terminated, so you don't risk, people using people's accounts that don't even work here anymore. So stuff like that. And it's all tied to Windows login. You don't need to have someone go, type in a login, in a custom LabVIEW dialog box or something like that. So that, in my opinion, is the most robust solution, but it's up to you. You can decide. You just need to have some way to say, hey, I need to check if you're authorized to use this or not. And then, kind of restrict access on that level. Limit access to systems to only functions that authorized users may execute. So in the LabVIEW world, I was actually just kind of talking about this. There's certain actions, right, that certain users may be able to do and execute that other users can't. So we can limit that access. And like I said, Active Directory is a great way to do that because you can create multiple user groups. I can have a user group, I can have an administrator user group, I can have an owner user group, etc. And they can all have different, capabilities and features. So you want to be able to just restrict certain functions to only certain users. And what functions you need to restrict are going to be different on an application basis, right? Sometimes there's lots of things you need to restrict, and sometimes, right, there's really not any administrator functions you really need to lock down. But yeah, so it's application specific. Next, we need to control the flow of controlled unclassified information, or CUI, through approval. So we need to make sure that CUI is being transferred securely. So we're controlling that flow. So test system, right? If you're testing products, typically that test data is CUI. So we need to make sure that we're controlling that flow of information properly. So we want to make sure that it goes where it's supposed to go and it's not able to go anywhere else, right? So for example, if we have a test stand running, it's collecting data and it's sending that data to a database. We want to make sure that data is getting to that database and that database specifically, and that it's not able to get exported to a Excel file or something else like that. We want to be able to control where that information is going and make sure it goes in approved methods, right? We've meeting with your security teams, et cetera, determining, hey, yeah, this data can go from this test stand to this database, et cetera, et cetera. And what that looks like will be different depending on the application, but that data is CUI, so we need to control how it moves throughout your software and throughout your facility. Next, logically separate individuals' duties to avoid harmful, non-collusive actions. So this just means, right, we need to not put all of our eggs in one basket in terms of a person, right? Just because someone's a developer doesn't mean they need to be able to globally do anything and everything and work with IT infrastructure. We want to separate those duties so that person can't do something harmful, right? They don't have global access to all of these different systems, etc. And that's typically going to be managed by your IT team. But yeah, we also want to employ the least privilege principle for all accounts, including privileged ones. So we need to determine what is the bare minimum privileges that this person can have in order to operate what they need to operate. And then we're going to basically set the privileges there. So, you don't need to be able to install software and to, do XYZ, edit stuff in the registry, all of this different stuff. If all you need to do is run the test stand, right? So we need to be able to restrict that to least privilege, meaning, hey, this is what you need to do your job, and that's it. Even privileged accounts, right? So there could be different administrator accounts that you have on a system. We need to even lock those down to least privilege so they can do administrator purposes that they specifically need to be able to do, but nothing beyond that. So, and typically, right, that's going to be on your IT team, but you can also implement least privilege in your LabVIEW systems, right? So saying, hey, this user, right, they only need access to these features, but this user needs access to a few more features, but we're going to restrict them at that point. So you will want to implement that in your LabVIEW programs as well. Utilize non-privileged accounts for all functions that do not require privileges. So you shouldn't be using administrator accounts for just basic functions. Not too much to go into there. Prevent the execution of privileged functions from users without privileges. So, a basic user shouldn't be able to use some sort of elevated permissions or administrator permissions. So we just need to control that. Which, like I said, if you're using, a lot of that's just IT focused. But in your own system, right, if you're using Active Directory, you just need to make sure there's no way that this user can somehow elevate their permissions that they may not actually have, right? We want to limit the amount of times any user can attempt to log in unsuccessfully. So that's largely talking about signing into computers, which you aren't really managing, your IT team is. But even in your LabVIEW software, if there is some sort of login, you don't want to let people just sit there and try passwords over and over again, right? If they've entered it wrong, and you can define what too many times is, right? Whether that's 3 tries, 5 tries, whatever that is, it's up to you to decide. But you don't want to let people just sit there and try to enter credentials until they find an account that lets them in. So we just need to limit that. So if you create a custom GUI for logging into your software, you do want to add some sort of check, right? If they've entered the wrong password, 5 times, maybe put the system on hold temporarily, right? Put like some sort of timeout period before they can enter another thing, or require them to reset credentials, or whatever, depending on what the system is. We also want to notify stakeholders of privacy and security rights per applicable CUI rules. So, and this is largely just handled by your IT team, right? They're letting people know. So your stakeholders, these are, people in your organization, largely like management, right? But it could be a lot of other different people. And they just need to let them know what these rights are. Next, we're going to utilize session locks and pattern hiding displays after periods of inactivity. We need to be locking systems after they've been idle for a bit, right? Which can be a real pain in test and measurement. So if we've got like a Windows computer, for example, right, and we set it to lock after 15 minutes, well, now it's locked. And if we have code that's executing on there, we have to sign back in to be able to access it, but it's also running on a specific user's account. So if that user isn't around anymore, but someone else needs to go, interact with that test, right? Well, the software is running on that user's account, not mine. So, it entirely can shift the way that you're doing your programming, right? Not creating something that's so user specific, but building systems that can dynamically work with any amount of users, right? That have the appropriate permissions. So a lot of times that might even mean like setting up a server and having your actual test, execution logic executing on a server, and the applications that the users are opening on their own user accounts might just be a client that can retrieve information about the test and also send commands to the server. So one of the real big pains I feel like in the test and measurement world is that control right there. Because if you're running a test that runs for a month, right, and it's running on a computer that's locking after 15 minutes of inactivity, and maybe lots of people need to be able to see what's going on in there, you have to build the tools in LabVIEW to make that data accessible and make the system accessible to all of these different users and whatnot. So it really fundamentally changes the way that you could be programming your LabVIEW systems. Next, we want to define conditions upon which access sessions are automatically terminated. So this is going to largely be your IT team, right? There's times where we just need to close a Windows session. We need to determine what those conditions are. If certain events are taking place, just close the account out, right? I don't think there's too much to worry about in the LabVIEW world on that. We want to closely monitor and tightly control all access sessions conducted remotely. So, whatever stuff is happening remote, and this largely talks to remote desktop type stuff, but it also talks to remote test systems, right? If you've created some sort of remote client or some sort of remote web page that you can interact with a test system with, you want to be able to control who has access to that. So not anyone can go and see how your test is performing, or even take control of your test and do something potentially harmful. So if we're setting up test systems with remote capabilities, we need to control who can access that, and we need to monitor who is accessing that. We also protect the confidentiality of remote access sessions using cryptographic keys. So your remote desktop should be secure, whether you're using like a VPN or some sort of other secure connection. But also, right, your remote sessions to test systems. So whether that's a web page or a remote client application or whatever, right, whatever data is being transmitted back and forth needs to be encrypted. We cannot be letting that data be sent, unsecure over the network, opening it up to man-in-the-middle attacks, stuff like that. We also want to ensure all remote access sessions are routed through access control points, and that is very IT specific. I don't really want to dive into that. Authorize all remote access of security relevant data and privilege commands. So if your LabVIEW system remotely can access CUI and can execute different commands, especially privilege commands, right? We need to authorize every connection. We need to check that that person actually is someone who has permission to do that. So, and it's up to you how you're going to do that, right? It could be something like login, right? And like I said, Active Directory, fantastic, right? You can use SAML, you can use LDAP, you can have custom logins. Sometimes that's a solution, right? I think using Active Directory is the most streamlined, but you can use OAuth even, right? If you have some way to use OAuth to authenticate to some service or something. We also want to authorize all wireless access privileges before enabling wireless connections. So we can't just start doing wireless connections like Bluetooth or like RF or something like that without actually making sure that they're approved first. So we need to talk to our security teams before we start doing that. Utilize authentication and encryption to protect all wireless access sessions. So if you're sending data over Bluetooth, right, we need to be validating those sessions, and we also need to be encrypting our data. So we can't just be sending data wirelessly over plain text, right? That data needs to be secure. So, and we also need to implement authentication, right? So you can't just connect to any Bluetooth device nearby. We need to be validating that that is the specific device that we want. So the way you do that is going to vary based off the device you're working with, obviously. But yeah, you'll need to figure out a way to authenticate and encrypt that data. Control all mobile device connections to networks containing sensitive data. That's very IT specific. I've never worked in an environment where mobile devices and LabVIEW have ever been even in the same realm. So I would say that's very LabVIEW specific. Encrypt all CUI for processing on any mobile devices or computing platforms. So this first part, mobile devices, probably doesn't really apply too much, but computing platforms. So that could be all sorts of different things. That could be your compact Rio. That could be your computers. That could be servers. That could be all sorts of different things. So we need to be encrypting data. We want to encrypt it in transmit. So when we're sending data from one place to another, it needs to be encrypted. But we also want to be encrypting data at rest. So if we're storing data in files and whatnot, even if it's just a temporary cache, we want to be encrypting that data. So if someone gets access to the file, they cannot actually access the data. Or if they were able to intercept like a packet or something while it was being transmitted, they cannot access the data in that packet. And there's lots of tools in LabVIEW for encryption. The Media Mongrels has their .NET cryptography library. I highly recommend that one. I've taken that and I've done some modifications, turned it into a class, and added some additional features of my own. And it's what I typically use. But if you just go download that package off VIPM, it includes functions for AES encryption, for RSA, for different hashing functions. I highly recommend you use that for securing your data. And lastly, we want to verify and control the amount and variety of connections to external systems. So, any sort of connections, right? We need to be authenticating, right? Checking that whatever connection is coming in is valid, right? It's a authorized connection, but we also want to control the amount, right? Because another thing that people can do is they can just do like a denial of service attack, right? They can just go connect, and do so many connections that it basically overloads the system and crashes it. So a common example would be web services, right? Web services are set up where they're just always listening for incoming connections, and things can connect. And even if they don't have the proper authorizations, right? Even if it doesn't have maybe there's an API key that's needed to connect. It's still, you can have, these massive amounts of connections coming in, and it has to basically, even if it is just to respond in order to deny access and say, hey, you're forbidden from accessing this because you don't have the appropriate API key, it can still just get completely overloaded by the massive amount of rejections that it's having to execute. So you want to be able to control the amount of connections. And there are a lot of different firewall tools for rate limiting. If you're working on compact Rio, it has IP tables installed on it, which you can also use to rate limit different ports. So I can actually apply rate limits to certain ports, and that way, if there's a massive amount of connections, I can actually say, hey, you're blocked from connecting for some period of time. So you want to make sure that there's controls in place so you can't get that denial of service attack, and you want to be verifying anything that is connecting, right? Sometimes there is instances where you just need a lot of connections, and so you'll have to determine what an appropriate amount is and how you can control that amount. So that would pretty much be the access control section of NIST 800-171. Thanks for watching.
Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.